Assalamu alaikum. This is our second lecture on hypertension. We have in previous lecture covered about the definitions and how to work up. Today we'll have just a review of what we have already covered, and then we'll talk about the management strategies for hypertension. This is one of my favorite pictures from possibly right. It's possibly from the Topkapi Museum of Istanbul. Now, how do we define hypertension? Hypertension is defined as sustained elevation of systolic blood pressure of above 140 and diastolic blood pressure of more than 90. There are few facts about hypertension. As we all know, it's a major risk factor for coronary artery disease and stroke. Obesity, inactivity, salt and alcohol intake are major contributors to the genesis of hypertension. Blood pressure do rise with age. 65% of the people above the age of 65 do have hypertension. There is 90% lifetime chance of developing hypertension even if someone is normotensive till the age of 55. Only 50% of the patient are aware that they have hypertension because, as we said, it's silent. Majority of it does not give any symptoms, and only the complication when sets in, then they are diagnosed as hypertensives. Only 50% of the hypertensive population of the world is under treatment, and only 50% of those they achieve the blood pressure control. So if we sum it up all together, only 1 in 8 of the hypertensive is treated and controlled. Again, we shared this picture or slide last time as well, that with each 20 millimeter of rise in systolic blood pressure, the cardiovascular mortality doubles, and someone with a blood pressure of 170, 105 may have 8 times more risk of developing complication as a result of hypertension. There are many diseases which are related to hypertension, which mean that the hypertension may be the underlying cause for that very disease. For example, 30 to 40% of myocardial infarct are as a result of hypertension or its complication. Similarly, 30 to 40% of the strokes are because of hypertension. 50% of the heart failure patients are as a result of hypertension related complications. And similarly, the 50% of the patient who has atrial fibrillation, they do have hypertension as its cause. We usually consider mitral stenosis or thyrotoxicosis as major cause of atrial fibrillation, but you have to keep in mind that hypertension also is. And similarly, more than 1/3 of the patient who develop renal failure, they do so because of hypertension can damage their kidneys. There are certain goals when we're managing the hypertension. The main primary goal or objective of treating hypertension is that we want to reduce the cardiovascular risk and prevent the cardiovascular events like heart failure, like myocardial infarction, like stroke or renal failure to develop. The risk, as we showed in the previous slide, of cardiovascular disease begins at around 115 over 75 mm mercury and doubles with each increment of 20 mm of systolic and 10 mm of diastolic blood pressure. If you lower the blood pressure by 10 to 15 mm of mercury from its baseline, it at least reduces the cardiovascular mortality by 1/3 up to 5 years. So this is one thing which we have to emphasize on our patients when we are treating, that even if their blood pressure is not lowered to normal reading, but if it is reduced by at least 10 to 15 millimeter, it still is beneficial. Many times patients do complain that if as their blood pressure is not lowered to the normal level, so why should they be taking the medication? So we can at least highlight that even this reduction is beneficial for them. Most of you are possibly following the famous say series orthogonal these days, and this is one of the picture of a mosque on this sidelines of Bosphorus in Istanbul. We did touch this topic previously as well, that when you have diagnosed hypertension, what else needs to be done and how this patient has to be assessed. So when assessing the hypertensive patients, you have four main issues which needs to be addressed. The first is that, is the patient truly hypertensive? We did talk about white coat hypertension, we talk about the pseudo hypertension, we talk about the reverse of that, right? Are there any identifiable secondary causes of hypertension? Is target organ damage present when the patient for the first time presents? And are there coexisting cardiovascular disease risk factors and or associated clinical conditions present which may modify our approach to hypertension? There are various guidelines for the diagnosis as well as detection and treatment of hypertension, and various societies, international societies, do come up with the, say, revision of those guidelines time to time based on the new data or new research which is being carried out, and then these are implemented. Or the most latest one which we are following these days is 8th Joint National Committee of Detection of Hypertension, which was released in 2014. We have American Society of Hypertension guidelines, we have International Society of Hypertension guidelines, we have European Society of Hypertension and European Society of Cardiology guidelines, and of course there is a Canadian guideline as well. So any one of that which you follow, they have almost similar recommendations with some minor differences. So we probably have to follow one of these guidelines which is in practice. The JNC 8 categorizes blood pressure into two main categories. Normal blood pressure is less than 120 systolic and less than 80 diastolic. We call pre-hypertension when blood pressure is from 120 to 139 and up to 89. So roughly you can say below 140/90, but above 120/80 would be labeled as pre-hypertension, and this patient probably should be regularly followed up for any say treatment or any need for treatment. We call it as stage 1 hypertension when the blood pressure is up to around 160 systolic and 100 diastolic, and we call stage 2 hypertension anything above 160 systolic or more than 100 diastolic blood pressure. We also talked about white coat hypertension and the need for recording home blood pressure monitoring or ambulatory blood pressure recording. So the reason where ambulatory blood pressure recording would be considered is white coat hypertension, which means that there is a high blood pressure reading in the clinic but normal blood pressure at home. So or the patient has hypertension but there is no target organ damage present. Similarly, it would be required when patient reports marked variability in blood pressure, but sometimes the blood pressure is too high and sometimes it is too low. So to document that, we probably require ambulatory blood pressure recording. Sometime hypertension clinic is detected, but these patients are at low cardiovascular disease risk, so we probably would like to know that if they are truly hypertensive or not. Sometimes patients complain of symptoms which look like to be hypotensive because of postural hypertension or because of say over treatment of hypertension. So these patients may not be having an hypotensive reading in clinic, so they may be put on ambulatory recording so that this hypotensive say events, they are documented. And sometimes we do, when you are using multiple drug for treatment of resistant hypertension, you also want to know that whether this is responsive to treatment or not. Now, the second say objective of or goal of our management of hypertension is, or the workup of hypertension is, that are there any identifiable secondary causes. So we do like to check clinical and family history. We perform a detailed and comprehensive physical examination and some baseline laboratory investigations. The minimum which we need to do is urinalysis, and we check this urine for presence of any microscopic hematuria, presence of microalbumin or protein or glucose or any other abnormals under microscopy. We do check certain blood levels like serum potassium, serum creatinine, fasting blood sugar level, lipid profile. Sometimes we have to go for glucose tolerance test, and of course you do estimate hemoglobin and do a baseline ECG to look for any left ventricular hypertrophy which can be detected on ECG. Then we have to identify that it is, as we said, majority of the hypertensive are essential hypertensive, or they are called having essential hypertension or hypertension which does not have any underlying secondary cause. But 5% of the patients do come into the category which we call as secondary hypertension as a result of some endocrine damage, disease, or as a result of some renal disease, or as a result of some structural vascular abnormalities. And if we identify these patients who have secondary hypertension, we can possibly cure their hypertension by treating those. There are certain clues in patients which may point towards a possible secondary hypertension, like someone with an unexplained hypokalemia and hypertension may have primary hyperaldosteronism. Those with a raised creatinine or having proteinuria in urine may have a chronic kidney disease as a cause of hypertension. Patient presenting with headache, palpitation, sweating, or say episodic hypertension may have an underlying pheochromocytoma. Sometimes a patient who is resistant, has a resistant hypertension, or they have a renal bruit, their hypertension may be secondary to renal artery stenosis. Those with the truncal obesity and stria may have a Cushing syndrome as their cause of hypertension. You find a difference in pulses in the upper and lower limb, and their femoral pulses are absent or weak. You may consider coarctation of aorta as cause of hypertension. You find a mass on abdominal examination in one of the flanks, which may be a enlarged kidney, so you may suspect polycystic kidney as a cause of hypertension. They complain of loud snoring and day-night somnolence or more sleepiness, may be pointing towards an obstructive sleep apnea, which does have a relationship with the hypertension. And someone who has undergone say renal transplant and is taking cyclosporin, this hypertension may be as a result of this cyclosporin related hypertension. So these are certain points in history and physical examination which, if found on a detailed examination, may lead to a cause of hypertension. Our next objective was that whether any target organ damage as a result of hypertension is already present or not. Similarly, the hypertension can affect heart, it can affect vascular system, it can affect kidneys, it can affect brain. So the patient may already have or may present with a coronary artery disease or angina. They may have a left ventricular hypertrophy on ECG or on echocardiography, or they may be presenting with left ventricular failure. Now, these are all pointer towards that the hypertension has led on to atherosclerosis and then its related complication. They may present with hypertensive retinopathy, they may have an aortic aneurysm, there may be peripheral vascular disease, or maybe presenting with a gangrene, which again point towards atherosclerosis as a result of hypertension. They may have renal damage as a result of hypertension and may present with the raised urea and creatinine, or maybe small shrunken kidneys, and they Sometimes their presentation may be with stroke or TIA or vascular dementia, and this might have had happened in past, or it may be their first presentation, and only then you come to know that the patient is hypertensive as well. Another objective of our examination or workup of hypertensive patient was that are there any coexisting cardiovascular risk factors present or not. So the risk factor, coexisting CVD risk factors include age, maybe more than 60, 65 year of age would be an increased risk for cardiovascular disease. Smoking, dyslipidemia, family history of cardiovascular disease or stroke or hypertension, having abdominal obesity, a marker of metabolic syndrome, elevated C-reactive proteins, or this presence of diabetes mellitus. Along with that, makes your subject more at risk of developing cardiovascular complication. Now, based on this workup, which includes say hypertension, the target organ damage, the coexist comorbidities, or any possible secondary say target organ damage, you can then identify the patient at risk that this hypertensive is more at risk of having a cardiovascular event in future, or as a less risk. British Hypertensive Society defines this calculation of risk based on this workup as to that if someone has target organ damage, which means that there is left ventricular hypertrophy either on ECG or echo, or there is proteinuria, or there is retinopathy on fundoscopic examination of the retina on the eye, or this patient already had cardiovascular disease complications, like he had suffered from a myocardial infarction, he has had a stroke in the past, or he had had a renal damage. So this is equivalent to having target organ damage. Or if the patient is diabetic along with hypertension, so either of this along with hypertension, or if this patient has calculated coronary heart disease risk of more than 15%, this is hypertensive is at risk. This is how this left ventricular hypertrophy manifests. You can look at the tall R wave in V4, 5 and 6, and then deep S wave over here, and similarly a tall R wave in 1 and lead AVL. So we have already talked about or considered this left ventricular hypertrophy criteria on ECG in previous lectures on ECG as well. This is the in the nutshell, that when you have a S wave which is deeper in lead V1 or 2, and R wave which is taller, and if you add these two together, the depth of the S wave like this is 10 into almost 18 millimeter, plus this 10, 20, 30, 35 millimeter over here. So S wave in V1 or V2, or R wave in height in V5 or V6, if added together, is more than 35 millimeter of say added together. So this is left ventricular hypertrophy as per ECG criteria. If you go for an echocardiogram, again we did show this, right? So look at this markedly hypertrophied left ventricle. This is the thickness of the septum. This is the thickness of the interventricular septal anterior wall. So this is again suggestive of target organ damage or left ventricular hypertrophy. This is another example that if you look at a normal non-hypertensive or normal left ventricle, so this much is the thickness of the septum. But if you look at the hypertensive heart, the cavity is reduced, but look at the thickness of the muscle in a concentric fashion, which is hypertrophied. Again, we talk about the retinal changes as a result of hypertension, which leads on to uh, narrowing of these blood vessels, lead on to some ischemia of the retina, and this ischemia then manifests in the form of either cotton wool spots or hard exudates or hemorrhages and maybe frank papilledema. I hope many of you may recognize. You can take it as one of the assignment questions in which places this it is from Pakistan. Now, when you have worked up your patient, you have defined that he is hypertensive, and then you have to decide that whether or this person needs or does not need initiation of treatment there and then or right away. Now, the initiation of treatment depends upon degree of overall cardiovascular disease risk and also on level of sustained blood pressure increase. There are following treatment steps which we need to take. One is at what level of say number of blood pressure reading or the number of blood pressure you should start the treatment. Which antihypertensive should we start with in which patient, and how do we achieve the target blood pressure level, and what is the target blood pressure level for various individuals, keeping in mind their age, keeping in mind their comorbidity, keeping in mind their other associated say risks. Now the threshold for treatment as per JNC 8 criteria is that if there is no target organ damage or there is no cardiovascular disease, you should start treating this blood pressure if it is persistently above 140/90 millimeter of mercury. Similarly, if there are risk factors present except for diabetes, other than diabetes, again the threshold to start treatment remains 140/90. With target organ damage, at again 140/90. But if someone has a renal disease manifested as proteinuria gross or an elevated creatinine, or a patient has hypertension, diabetes, sorry, the level at which you start treating them is above 130/80. Similarly, this was the threshold at which you should start your treatment. Then there has to be a target that to which level you have to lower this blood pressure in certain way. This is again should be defined from the very beginning, that your patient should have this much of lowering of blood pressure. The various societies, JNC or Joint National Committee, British Hypertension Society, American Kidney Association, American say European Society of Hypertension, Canadian Heart Society, say National Kidney Foundation, and then WHO, ISH. There are various, as I said, organization or steering committees which time to time say revise, modify the guidelines and criteria for treatment or threshold for treatment. So all have a consensus that if someone has uncomplicated hypertension without any target organ damage and without much of comorbidities, their blood pressure should be lowered to 140/80, less than 140/80. But if someone has diabetes or has renal disease, there the target should be further lowered, that their blood pressure should be brought down to less than 130/80. Right? And if someone has already developed renal failure, the blood pressure target further lowers down to 125/7, less than 125/75. Now this is our algorithm for treatment of hypertension. The first thing which we want to say address is that there should be lifestyle modification. We'll talk about in a moment. And if after about 1 to 3 months of just a lifestyle modification, your blood pressure is not at goal, which means less than 140/90 for those without any diabetes or renal disease, or less than 130/80 if there is already diabetes or kidney disease present. Then you start drug therapies. Now, the initial drug choice for hypertensive again has been grouped into two classes. Someone with some compelling indication, there would be a certain drugs which are preferred, and if there are no compelling indication, you again, uh, as per classification, you class them into stage 1 hypertension or stage 2 hypertension. So you can start with anything starting from maybe diuretic or AC inhibitors or angiotensin receptor blockers, beta blocker, calcium channel blocker, and sometimes you may go for combination. But in stage 2 hypertension, which means if your blood pressure is above 160/100 to start with, you always start with, to begin with, to start with combination of two drugs, and you can combine ACE inhibitor and ARB with either beta blockers or calcium channel blockers. But sometimes there are certain special situation which we call a compelling indication, which demands a specific drugs to be used as needed. Again, we'll talk about in a moment. But if with even use of two drugs, blood pressure is not at goal, and the goal was less than 140/90 for no target organ damage or no diabetes or kidney disease, and less than 130/80 for those who has diabetes or kidney disease. In that case, you optimize the dose, maximum dose, tolerable dose of a drug, and you add an additional drug or a third additional drug into it. As we started off, that this algorithm was telling us that we start with the lifestyle modification. What lifestyle modification? We modify your diet, exercise, reduce weight, reduce alcohol, reduce or omit alcohol consumption, stop smoking, and even with simple, say, measures in changes in your lifestyle and diet, you can have quite a significant drop in blood pressure. As I said, simple weight reduction by 10 kg of weight loss would lead on to a reduction in blood pressure of 5 to 20 millimeter of systolic. It is said that each 1 kg of blood weight reduction reduces 2 millimeter of systolic blood pressure and 1 millimeter of diastolic blood pressure. So simple 5 to 10 kg weight reduction may be enough to lower blood pressure by around 5 to 10 millimeter of mercury. If you adopt a DASH eating plan, which will be elaborating soon, you can have a reduction in blood pressure of around 8 to 14 millimeter. If you reduce sodium intake, you can lower the blood pressure by 2 to 8 millimeter. Daily physical activity of walking around minimum of 6,000 to 10,000 steps a day reduces the blood pressure by around 10 millimeter of mercury. And if you reduce alcohol consumption, again, there is, so you can see that just by having an increase in physical activity, restricting sodium, modifying your diet, and weight reduction can have a significant uh, benefit of reducing the blood pressure without any pharmacological agents being used. The DASH diet program is that you have to have more whole grain products, eat more fresh fruits and vegetables. You should use low fat milk, use low fat meat and alternatives, reduce saturated fat content, reduce the salt content, and if you follow all these principles, this is what is called as a DASH plan. The exercise, as I said, 30 to 60 minute of endurance activity or a daily walk for about 4 to 7 days or 5 days per week in an average is sufficient to have an impact on reducing the blood pressure by around 7 to 10 millimeter of mercury. Now, coming on to pharmacological, say, management. the factors which contribute in hypertension, that has to be considered. And if you consider that how this hypertension is produced and how which factors contribute to its genesis as well as its say sustenance, then you can probably target that very component of say blood pressure say rise, and then you can have a more selective drug uh, uses. So as we know, blood pressure is a product of cardiac output and peripheral resistance, and cardiac output in itself is a product of heart rate and stroke volume. So there are the factors which say modify the blood pressure include heart rate, stroke volume, and peripheral vascular resistance. Right. So if you take it as this red heart sign as a heart rate, this bucket as a stroke volume, and this say again rounded cylinder as a peripheral vascular resistance, this is how we'll be understanding that which component of the blood pressure generation you are targeting with a certain medication. Right. So this is the just another the, the con the components of genesis and maintenance or sustenance of blood pressure include heart rate, arteries which contribute to peripheral vascular resistance, and veins which say contribute venous return which contributes to the stroke volume. Now we can understand the various site of action of pharmacological agents which we are using. Like the venous return is affected by diuretics, thiazides, loop diuretics, uh, then the aldosterone antagonists, nitrates, and to some extent even angiotensin converting enzyme inhibitors and ARB. They act actually onto either uh, reducing the stroke volume, or they lead on to venodilatation, and which would this venodilatation would reduce the venous return. Then there are drugs which would affect the heart rate and contractility, like beta blockers. They reduce heart rate. Diltiazem, verapamil, they to some extent reduce the heart rate but reduce the myocardial contractility. And then there are certain centrally acting drugs like clonidine, which do have an effect on the heart contractility. Then there are agents which act on the arteries to lead on to vasodilatation or arteriodilatation, like calcineurin blockers, hydralazine, minoxidil, alpha blockers, but more importantly, angiotensin converting enzyme inhibitors, ARBs, which are actually arteriodilator and they reduce the peripheral resistance. And so when you are the clinical approach is that when you have to use combination of drugs for treatment of hypertension, if one single agent is not sufficient enough to reduce the blood pressure to your goal, then you combine drugs. You can combine like this, you can select one agent acting at one site of action, like you take a diuretic, you take a beta blocker, and you take an ACE inhibitors, right? The recommendation is that you choose one agent from each category. But again, you have to be a bit careful that certain combinations may not be as say sometime may be harmful, sometime may not be as useful. So this is this representation that you can combine uh, anything with anything, except there are two, that is the calcineurin blockers and beta blockers, particularly verapamil and beta blocker should not be combined together because they can lead on to marked reduction in the heart rate and marked reduction in the contractility of the heart. Other than that, you can combine any agent with any other agents, like diuretic with either a beta blocker or ACE inhibitors or alpha blocker, an ARB with almost everything, right? Then we talked about that there are certain special situations or compelling indication where a particular drug must be selected as a preference, right? So this is if someone has heart failure, of course the diuretic would be more appropriate, and of course then there would be an AC inhibitors or ARB or aldosterone antagonist to be used more preferentially. And we have reasons for that, that this say compel compelling indication to use a certain say class of drug is based on certain guidelines which are from various trials, like American College of Cardiology or American Heart Association, the trial by the name of Copernicus, SALT, TRACE, Valsartan heart failure trial, and RAIL study, which all support that diuretics and AC inhibitors and ARB, along with aldosterone antagonist and beta blocker, may be uh, preferred over other agents in treatment of patients with heart failure and hypertension. Someone who has had a myocardial infarction in recent past or has a previous history of myocardial infarction, their beta blocker would be preferred over other agents, and of course the next agents which would be preferred would be AC inhibitors or aldosterone antagonist. Again, these are the SAVE and FSS guidelines or studies which have shown a mortality benefit in by use of these agents. Someone who has a very high risk of coronary artery disease, again beta blocker would be more preferred, and again there are certain trials which are favoring their use, right? Then there are situations which we last time again discussed, that certain definitions like what is hypertensive emergency, what is hypertensive urgency. So hypertensive emergency or crisis is when there is a severe elevation in blood pressure complicated by evidence of impending or progressive target organ or end organ dysfunction, like we talked about heart failure or like we talked about renal failure, along with an elevated blood pressure. An urgency is just a marked elevation of blood pressure, but there is no progressive target organ dysfunction. Of course, this definition does not keep into account any certain level or cutoff level of blood pressure being considered as emergency, or it is all dependent upon the target organ present or not present. There are terms like severely elevated blood pressure when someone has a blood pressure of 180 or 120. There is a term used as accelerated hypertension when someone with a chronic hypertension have and sudden increase in blood pressure along with retinopathy developing recently. There is term used as malignant hypertension when your patient has hypertension along with grade 4 retinopathy along with the papilledema. So this is these are all terms used at various say presentations or at various stages. Someone with the stage 2 hypertension, which is more than 160/100, and the stage 2 hypertension, again as we said, can be classified into urgency or emergency, as we had just discussed. When we call this hypertension is resistant, so once you are using, patient is compliant to drug therapy, is taking medication regularly, is following all the dietary and lifestyle say plans, and is taking an appropriate dose of an appropriate drug, or at least more than 3 drug combination, but still his blood pressure is not on target or not to the goal, then we call it as resistant hypertension. Now, the resistant hypertension does not always mean that the patient has true resistant hypertension, right? We have been talking about white coat hypertension, which means that their office readings or clinic readings are always high, whereas their home readings are normal. So this is called white coat hypertension, and again has to be considered before you label it as the resistant hypertension. And for that, we did mention that we probably have to go for maybe ambulatory blood pressure recording, or you may have to go for home blood pressure monitoring and charts being maintained. You do also consider pseudo resistance, which means that the patient maybe may not be taking the medication as prescribed. That's why his blood pressure is always high, and you start considering it's resistant. So you have to check for the medicine compliance and drug compliance as well. And similarly, when you encounter a resistant hypertension, which means that difficult to treat hypertension with use of more than three uh, pharmacological agents, then you must look for maybe an underlying secondary cause, which we did describe earlier. Now, here is a case scenario. A 45-year-old male who has presented to the medical emergency with complaints of vomiting, confusion, and altered state of consciousness. On examination, his vitals are blood pressure of 200 over 110, pulse of 72, and patient is afebrile. So, what do you think is the possible diagnosis? 45, male, his presentation is vomiting, confusion, altered state of consciousness with a blood pressure of 200 over 110. This would be called as hypertensive encephalopathy. Whenever you have an alteration of consciousness or addition of fits with an elevated blood pressure, there is a failure of say cerebral autoregulation, and this cerebral autoregulation would lead on to either maybe patient becoming more drowsy or comatose, or maybe he may even start having irrelevant talk, and may even have focal neurological signs as well. Hypertensive emergencies, right? So when you have hypertension, it can be sometimes a serious condition associated with target organ damage, and if you do not treat, it may lead on to high mortality. The causes of this may, as I said, be non-compliance and poorly controlled chronic hypertension. You have to define whether it's a urgency versus emergency. The treatment should be tailored to the individual's condition. The initial goal in hypertensive urgency is that you reduce by 25% drop in blood pressure within the first 3 hours. A very precipitous drop is just as bad, because so when you're treating this, you have to uh, continuously monitor your patient so that they do not develop uh, a very precipitous fall, and sometimes this precipitous fall can be, say, more damaging than the elevated blood pressure. A 55-year-old female presented to the medical OPD with complaints of blurring of vision for 2 months and decreased urine output for the past few days. Her blood pressure and presentation was 175 over 105. So how would you manage this patient? The pre-hospital care of such patients should include address the manifestation of hypertension. You have to notice that whether this elevated blood pressure is associated with any symptoms of chest pain, headache, vomiting, heart failure. Reduction of blood pressure is not indicated in pre-hospital setting. You should not advocate use of rapidly lowering antihypertensive drugs like, say, use of sublingual captopril or nifedipine to be given in pre-hospital setting or at home, because, as I said, a very rapid lowering can be more damaging than any benefit. But you also keep in mind that this rapid lowering of blood pressure can critically decrease the end organ perfusion, particularly to the brain and kidney, and can be more devastating than the initial blood pressure damage which is being done. When these patients land in emergency room, you consider the context of elevated blood pressure, whether it may not be just because of pain or anxiety or stress. You screen for end organ damage through history and some basic workup which we already covered. If there is no evidence of target organ damage, you can possibly discharge and follow up. But anyone who present in the emergency room with an elevated blood pressure and there is an evidence of target organ damage on history or on your initial workup in ER, this person require an ICU admission, and there should be a rapid but gradual lowering of blood pressure, and you might have to use intravenous medication for that purpose. The medication which can be used in patients with the hypertensive urgencies can be oral, sometime in patient with particularly those who are chronic hypertensive, but in hypertensive emergencies you possibly rely on intravenous antihypertensives only. An ideal intravenous antihypertensive should lower the blood pressure without compromising the blood flow to the critical organ. So it should not have some kind of a steal phenomena that it lowers the blood pressure, but it lowers the blood, lead on to decrease in blood supply to the critical organs. Vasodilators are generally considered as first choice because they preserve organ blood flow in the face of reduced perfusion, and they also tend to increase the cardiac output. Right, so the agents like nitroprusside or hydralazine may be preferred over agents like methyl dopa or agents like nitrates. As I said, the goal is to get to the goal. So if someone has hypertension alone, the target of lowering blood pressure is up to 140/90. But if he has diabetes or renal disease, the blood pressure to be lowered up to 130/80. And patient should be provided with certain goals that you have to lower this blood pressure to this level, and they should be counseled and explained, and each and everything should be given them in writing on each office visit. When a patient is still not at goal with the regular medication and you have optimized the dosage, you have added drugs, you then do consider resistant hypertension, and of course you have to assure that the drug therapy is rational. You should follow your patient of hypertension approximately every 1 to 2 months, and initially, but once this steady state level has reached and patient has achieved their target goal blood pressure, then you may follow up them every 3 to 6 months. But those who have comorbid condition may require more frequent and more earlier visits, and you continuously have to encourage your patient to have a self monitoring of the blood pressure at home, and at least these patients who are on treatment should be monitored for their serum potassium and creatinine level at least once or twice in a year. Thank you very much for your patient hearing, and I hope that now we are left with just one or two, maybe one lecture more, and then we'll have say test in cardiovascular disease, inshallah.